Hi, I'm Erin Power.
And I'm Laura Rupsis.
We're certified health coaches, and this is Health Coach Radio.
This podcast is about the art, science, and business of health coaching.
We share our insider tips to help you become a better coach and entrepreneur.
And we interview expert guests to discover how they've made it in this growing field.
It's time for health coaches to make an impact.
It's time for Health Coach Radio.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Health Coach Success Virtual Masterclass. My co-host Laura and I worked hard to pull together this special online event just for you. It's a 5-day mini course in which we interview the best and brightest health coach and marketing experts on the planet to try to understand how they've become such great coaches and entrepreneurs. Included in the 20-plus expert interviews are some names you might recognize. Primal Health Coach Institute founder Mark Sisson, celebrity nutrition expert and New York Times bestselling author J.J. Virgin, author, cardiologist, and staunch health coach advocate Dr. William Davis, Michelle Liotta of Health Coach Power Community, Michelle Norris, CEO of Paleo FX and ID Life Nutrition, and many, many more. The Health Coach Success Virtual Masterclass is now available and totally free for a limited time. Check it out at primalhealthcoach.com/success. Today we've got a return visitor to the podcast, Sam Miller of Sam Miller Science and the Free Nutrition Coaching Collaborative Facebook group. We talked about what everyone's talking about, coronavirus, and how you should focus on optimizing the areas of your health that you can control. We talked about the tweet that put him on the map. We talked about reverse dieting. And we talked about how coaches can use storytelling, models, and frameworks to connect to their clients' goals, hopes, and dreams. We talked about a lot of different things. It's always fun to chat with a knowledgeable industry veteran like Sam. Sam puts out a ton of great content and information for the health and nutrition coach looking to master the gap between macros, metabolism, and medicine, and scale their coaching business to the next level. He helps coaches answer the question, how do I become the last coach my client ever needs? We'd love to have you screenshot your podcast player and tag us on Instagram at Health Coach Radio. Don't forget to tag Sam too at Sam Miller Science. By the way, the show notes for this episode and all previous episodes of Health Coach Radio can always be found at primalhealthcoach.com/radio. All right, let's get into it with Sam Miller. All right, welcome back to the show, Sam Miller. Interesting character. You've done a lot of interesting things, including the tweet heard around the world, which is what I think you're probably most famous for.
I didn't know you guys knew about that. I thought that was still kind of low-key in my own little universe, but I guess
can't hide anything from us.
Reputation precedes me. It was an okay tweet. I mean, it wasn't my best work, tweet. But it was like, it was something that it's interesting what people grab onto, right? So I can spend like 10 minutes on an IGTV giving away free education that's like super valuable. And then I can put a sentence together and it's just super shareable. And that's what people see. That's what gets the likes and the follows versus actual, substantial, research-backed information. So it's kind of funny, but that's part of how social media is, which was kind of what we were chatting about even before we hopped on the podcast today. So definitely interesting. But that tweet, even the last interview I was on, they mentioned that too. So now, guys, you got to check out something beside the tweet.
Yeah, you should recite it so people know who actually inaugurated it, because I saw it last week. Somebody else posted it as that was their own content.
Oh, man.
Tell everybody what your tweet was, word for word, so we know.
Yeah, I've kind of given up on that. Let me. So it was coronavirus. This was okay. So also for context. This was like, I tweeted this end of February, posted it very first week of March. So this was still kind of very early on, severity wise in terms of this whole situation. So at the time we had about 3,000 people that had died of coronavirus. So I said, coronavirus kills 3,000 people and we lose our shit. Obesity kills 300,000 people annually. And we come out with a new flavor of Doritos. And then I did like the little thinking face and the guy with the spectacle, because I think he's interesting. He's provocative. Yeah. So that was my tweet. Obviously, so I have older parents, and I'm very pro like some of the measures we're taking, social distancing, like respecting that individuals have different levels of immunity. There are populations that are immunocompromised. I think it's very important to be sensitive to that. Obviously, in February, March, the situation was a lot different in the United States than it is right now. think it's a good idea for us to wash our hands all the time. I don't know about you guys, but we can probably keep that train rolling even into May, June, July, August, maybe even stretch it past Labor Day. But yeah, that tweet was just coming from a place of, being a healthcare professional, nutrition coach, fitness professional who's been in the industry for over a decade. It's just a lot of times kind of the latest thing or the latest concern seems to rob our attention from something like obesity, which has so many other comorbidities and factors that really rob people of not only lifespan, but health span. So it's not just that whether someone's alive or dead, but what is their life like when they're actually alive? And so what's interesting about that tweet is because it's so short, obviously I couldn't go into things like health span. The caption, if you hadn't read the caption, basically is more about focusing on what's in the locus of our control. So you can control your nutrition. I may quote some segments here from it, but basically you can control your nutrition, the amount of sleep you get, you can optimize your health, making certain choices on a daily basis. That comes down to something that we all have power over. And sometimes we give our power away, whether that's related to our health, our mindset, so many other things and things that other individuals or variables or circumstances control. And that can be really defeating, and that can really cause some emotional turmoil. And so where my tweet was coming from was really, hey, this is definitely a health issue on our hands, but also there's one of the best things you can do to modulate this. So COVID-19 causes a pro-inflammatory cytokine storm, also has, sort of works on our interferon response in our body, and also interacts with our ACE2 receptors. So those are kind of the three mechanisms by which it's influencing our health. Well, that first thing I mentioned, that inflammatory cytokine storm, inflammation is closely tied with how we eat, whether we exercise or not. And one of the best ways to reduce inflammation is through sleep. So if you can tackle those things, you're in a much better place. It doesn't mean, everything's going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that you're totally safe from any virus ever, but it just means this is probably going to be good for you to take some precautions when it comes to your health. So tweet was kind of focus on what's, within your control and try to optimize that before you worry about things that you may not ever have a say over. So that was kind of my appearance to the grand. I've seen people repost that where I'm like, you're way more popular than me. I would think that you would create your own content, and then you go through and I'm like, now I realize you have actually taken stuff from everyone just every week.
Yeah. Well, wait, that's true. So the tweet, I saw it on Instagram, so I did read through the caption, and that's just a good thing to do, folks. Read the caption, because you weren't just being snarky or trying to get a laugh. You were trying to share information and be really proactive in that. So it was really good, really well done, really good slice of content. But we're not here to necessarily talk about your Twitter fame.
Yeah.
Although
I forgot I quoted, so I read the
now.
Daily Stoic and a lot of Ryan Holiday stuff because I like it from a mindset perspective. And the quote was just, the more we value things outside our control, the less control we have. And then I kind of start off with death is devastating regardless of the cause. And then going into things like illnesses and accidents and the situation that we're facing. But it really is a shame because when it comes to something like obesity and our health, and even some of the topics that we're talking about before, hopping on the show and hitting the record button is, there are things we can change and things we can't necessarily change. And I see so many people who, put so much into this statistic of, the coronavirus death toll. And it's like, well, we still have a lot of people who are struggling with even something as basic as the food that we eat, and we all need to eat. That's what I love about nutrition is it's kind of like a common thread amongst population is like across the population is we all need to eat. We all need to rest and recover. We all ideally should be moving in some form or fashion, whether you subscribe to one particular diet style or another. That is kind of like the lifeblood of the human race. So just kind of an interesting overarching philosophy, but yeah, I'm glad we're not going a full hour on tweets. That would,
no.
I don't really have any other viral ones, so we'd run out of material really quickly.
But I just think the underlying point of the whole thing is so important, and it's so relevant to this audience because I watch the news like everybody else. The good news is I still have a job and I'm focused on something else that's actually, productive. But I don't care what news outlet you're watching. There's nobody talking about how to actually improve the overall health of our nation so that we don't suffer these kinds of consequences. Because this is, I'm sorry, not a superbug, folks. If we were healthier as a population, this would be no big deal.
I know, but and it feels, don't you find, Sam, that it feels kind of echo chamberish? Like we're talking about the metabolic comorbidities, but
nobody else is. And it's not reaching the people that need to hear it because they don't follow us.
Or they'll pick one particular case of like, well, this 30-year-old who was an endurance athlete who is training and running marathons. And it's like, well, that also poses certain health concerns. Like they're training for sport, which is different than what's going on in terms of health. There actually, I know plenty of distance athletes and triathletes who struggle with things like inflammation. And, just because you play a particular sport doesn't necessarily mean you're healthy. So I think it's tough. And news sources in themselves have inherent biases and the ways that they report things in certain cases that they're trying to promote or advocate or kind of lobby for. And so I really try to stay removed from the news, and I'll tune into like the CDC and important updates from organizations that are researching this. But yeah, it is kind of sad. It seems it sort of, when you bring it up, and a lot of the people who gave pushback on that type of comment were, one, we're either kind of some people can't control this. Obesity is also a disease, like so rude to mention this. But a lot of it is, well, what do we actually have a choice over? We have the choice to wash our hands. We have the choice to, sleep. Social distancing is great. If you're in a sort of at-risk population, probably mask or gloves or something like that might be good precaution. But yeah, it was kind of frustrating to see, because people will sort of turn a blind eye to that, and just, it's the same issue year over year. It's almost as bad as like when we knew smoking was pretty terrible for your lungs, and lung cancer was a larger cause of death or cancer, and just sort of allowed that situation to proliferate. And so I view kind of some of the same things with obesity. Like we literally have people who are designed at food companies to make things addictive, right? And then we also have, and don't get me wrong, like I will occasionally veer off and like have the occasional snack or two, but I think we forget that even going to a grocery store, like the end cap of a grocery store, it's there because they're trying to sell through that product. It's sales, it's marketing. It's not because that 3 for $5 deal on soda is what's best for you. It's just, they're trying to move through product, and they're a business like anyone else. And then that grocery store is trying to sell through what they got from the supplier, whether it's Frito-Lay or anyone else. I put Doritos in my particular example, but you could have replaced it with any other, Twinkies, and, we'd still have issues. So I think we lose sight of that, especially when it comes to food and production in general. So many things have changed in our agricultural system, even in, whether it's farming or meat production, which that would outside the agricultural system, obviously. Right. But yeah, I think people forget that even walking into the grocery store is like a sales experience. Like you're being sold to based on what's at eye level, what's not, what's on an end cap, what's when you walk in the store, when you go to checkout, just impulse decisions all the time that are kind of happening subconsciously. And so even writing the tweet, I was kind of thinking about that as like, there's still a business behind all of it. And so that's what's kind of interesting with some of the predicaments that we deal with obesity. And some people just, I think this may fall more on the psychology or mindset side, but really struggle to course correct. They just like accept that that's life, as they know it, versus taking productive action to change. And that's where health coaches, nutrition coaches, fitness professionals really, are worth their weight in gold, is like the ability to help in those types of situations.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Oh yeah. I feel like the grocery store is like full of landmines. That's why when I do have a local client, part of my package is to take them to the grocery store and help them understand everything they're seeing and how it's laid out and why it's laid out that way. And you need to spend your time, let's take a look at our shopping list that you put together, Mr. and Mrs. Client, because these are the foods you told me you enjoyed. Let me show you how to shop for them and what aisles you don't even need to go down and why, and teaching them how to read a nutrition label. Most people they have no idea. This is where we go into, how important it is for coaches to help their clients redesign their own environment. Because if your environment is not supportive of the choices you're trying to make, it's not just your willpower. Your own environment is working against you. And this is where health coaches shine. And it's what doctors and nurses and dietitians don't do.
Yeah, if a snack's in your pantry during quarantine, there's probably a good chance you're going to eat it if it already made its way home. So being strategic about shopping is important. Leveraging, we have more health food websites than ever, more delivery services than ever. Granted, they may be like a week behind on their delivery schedule, but there's still options there. Still companies where, I've been excited recently, finding some things where it's like you can get wild salmon and grass-fed beef or bison, and they even had elk and venison. I was shocked. So just some alternative options and things besides grocery store. But I definitely agree, like the whole shopping experience is just so different, even generationally, probably from our parents or grandparents and everyone before that. We obviously have had a lot of health changes since then, metabolically, hormonally. Like we're on an entirely different planet. And one thing we were talking about earlier is just kind of the difference with health span and lifespan. I think our food choices definitely play a huge role in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Actually, just a fun anecdote. My very, very, very first client was a food engineer. I was like,
yeah, it's crazy that we have a job called food engineer versus like you grow the food or you harvest the food or you deliver the food, but engineering the food just seems like, you can engineer, maybe a computer software or, maybe, I don't know, I think of like artificial things. One of the things that came to mind was Play-Doh. I don't know why, but it's like, okay, we got to create this weird substance. We need an engineer for that versus food. It's like, it's in the nature. Just need to go find it.
It was crazy though, because, a newbie health coach, I'm like, okay, well, don't eat processed foods. And she's like, that's my whole job. I have to eat them at work to make sure they taste good. I'm like, okay, great. Thanks, universe. ...
Could this have anything to do with why you're hiring a health coach?
Exactly. Yeah.
Environment. Yeah.
Oh, we have so many things we want to unpack with you, Sam. And we were talking off air, as podcasters always do. We always have such good nuggets off air. Why do we do that? We should just press record right away. But anyway, we were talking, Laura and I both listened to a podcast episode you did with Dr. Jade Tita, who we love, and who, for some reason, you and Dr. Jade are like, I don't know,
tight.
So correlated because you're both metabolism guys or hormone guys, endocrine guys. Yeah, bros. But one thing that I loved about what the whole conversation was about was, and I think we should talk about it here today, is how coaches make health information accessible and understandable for what we call the health consumer, the client, basically. And in that conversation, you were talking about like how both of you have your sort of acronyms that you use to really effortlessly deliver the message of what the client's experiencing in their body, rather than throwing kinds of sort of diagnoses like adrenal fatigue or insulin resistance at them.
Right.
So I thought that was really a valuable point, because we've talked a lot to health business coaches on this podcast, and Laura and I both mentor a lot of health coaches in our day jobs. And one thing that we keep hearing is like, you've got to build something that's your own. You've got to kind of figure out a way to articulate these ideas in your own way. So let's just dive into that a little bit. Let's start with a brand new newbie coach. And we don't have to worry too much about what area of specialty they're in. But how do you suggest a new coach straight out the gate begins the process of developing these sort of signature methodologies and frameworks?
So I definitely think frameworks are important. Models are super important. Acronyms are cool. And sometimes that comes with practice. I think one thing that's overlooked that sometimes comes before the framework is just a relatable story. So if you're a new health coach, chances are you became a health coach because of something that happened in your own life, or maybe someone that's close to you, something that you're passionate about. And you may not be able to connect on the level of physiology or psychology or metabolism. And so it can be difficult to explain these things, but sometimes using the story of a peer or your own story in terms of, recently something that's been coming up a lot is like explaining reverse dieting to a client, or especially with beginner coaches. It's like, well, what do I do if this person's under eating, but they're in a place metabolically where things are a little messed up? And I think that's where stories can be super powerful, is sharing, like as humans, we understand like a collective shared experience and same pain points and symptomologies and same struggles. So if you say, well, Mrs. Jones was really struggling to lose weight and this is what she was doing, I think stories are kind of like step one for the beginner coach, because we learn stories from a very young age, once upon a time, and we grow up with Disney. And so stories are kind of a very important part of our culture and have been passed down generation to generation. So never kind of overlook the power of a story. In terms of models and frameworks, keeping it easy to remember is certainly important. So those of you who maybe are less familiar with the last podcast that we did or didn't hear what Jade and I were kind of going back and forth on, I basically have a specific model that teaches more biofeedback and what we should be tracking in client check-ins. I also talk about different dimensions of metabolism and some of the issues that we see when people come into your coaching practice. For example, if someone's under eating versus someone's overeating, those are two different problems, but both the idea that we moved away from this moderation. And then similar with teaching about different like toggles of a transformation or hormones and things like that. So probably one of the, basic examples that may have come up on that podcast is, so I've been using Shreds as far as check, because everyone wants, they come to you, they want to lose weight, they want to be leaner. Shreds has kind of been also twisted by the fitness industry in a certain way. And so it was kind of like poking fun at that at first, but it's basically sleep, hunger, recovery, energy, digestion, and stress. So obviously if you can make it a word, that's great. But the idea is just something easy to remember for clients of what should I tune into when I'm checking in with my body? Because, when clients start off, sometimes it can be kind of like an old fashioned radio. We can turn the dial and we get to a particular station and we're like, okay, I'm tuned into this. But now, in modern days, we might have a car with like 12 different buttons as far as like we can store all these presets of all these different things to tune into in these different stations. And so for clients, it's really a matter of like teaching them to start with tune into one station. Maybe it's hunger, or maybe it's fatigue and energy. And then maybe from there it branches out and it's like, okay, digestion. And so we're adding layers step by step in terms of what they're actually able to be cognizant of on a daily basis. And so that's where that model came in, is like, how, if I were to come up with 4 or 5 things that were just super important, and I need you to remember this at the end of the day, regardless of whether the day goes as planned or not, let's do a little check-in with yourself. Like, keep this in mind when we do our weekly check-in or however we're touching base or a call, and they can remember that. They can just remember, okay, my sleep is important. My hunger is important. My recovery is important. And so you could make something, talking about, if you work with athletes, the gym and PRs and your drive to go to the gym, that's super important. If you're working with weight loss clients, have, an understanding of appetite or cravings versus hunger, and the difference between those, I think, is super important. So I would say start with stories, number one, super easy. And then kind of try to think of, as a coach, if you were to arm your clients with like 3 to 5 things where if they remembered those things, the big rocks, what would move the needle the most from week to week when that client is starting out. So if you're a new coach, those are going to be your momentum shifters. They kind of move the tide in the right direction so that the client feels like they're making progress, they're more aware of their body, and they'll start to see patterns and themes and trends that sort of identify ways that you can make future progress. So that would probably be my advice. As far as teaching those, it is sort of difficult to teach, but I think depending on your life, using analogies, and everyone likes, for the most part, lists are easy to understand. It's just kind of how humans learn. So if you think about like, how do I make this as easy to digest as possible? And I would start there and then just try to continue to simplify it and fine tune it. If it can rhyme or it's in a word, that's cool. But if not, like, don't sweat it. I think last time I was on the podcast, I taught about like reaching physical goals. I use the P3 model, which is basically like your physical goals are always preceded by your perception and your practices, which dictate your physiology, and then your physiological state. So earlier we talked about like adrenal insufficiency or adrenal maladaptation, like that is going to influence your ability to reach physical goals. So like if you're trying to lose body fat or something like that. So those, I think those will come to you in your coaching journey. If they happen to start with the same letter, you can make a little, abbreviation or acronym, but otherwise I think stories and like condensed, easy to remember things, because humans have, like, we've got so much on our plate. It's such a distracted world. It's like, how do I actually drive this home and get this like unabridged message across to my clients, and you'll build on it over time.
Yeah. I love the power of using biofeedback. I just think it helps give the client more tools to help themselves as well, and just being aware. Do you have any like recommended strategies and tools on how a coach can help organize or how a coach can help a client think through how to use that biofeedback to be like, we talked about this, and is it, as far as building a program, do you recommend using journaling? Do you recommend just checking in once a week and discussing all these things as you go? Is daily more impactful and kind of in real time? Any thoughts there?
So a lot of this is going to come down to your program delivery and like how you're packaging your services. So if you have daily interaction, or maybe you're a fitness professional that sees people face to face, that's going to be different than phone calls or Zoom, or maybe even if you're email coaching or texting or Voxer or whatever platform you're using. There are coaches that use WhatsApp and have foreign, like international clients. So it's important to understand that the communication modality matters. But I would say in those situations, I'll use different things depending on the client. So like a morning routine is lacking. Well, let's put in a morning routine. How does that help your overall level of self-awareness? And then maybe we worry about something else later. So like maybe we're not quite there yet to tune into digestion every single day, but this person's super stressed. So it's like making them aware of that level of stress. Or maybe they're an athlete. Maybe we start with recovery because that's already on their mind. If they come to me and they say, I'm an athlete, that's a priority. So I'm going to get buy-in on assessing recovery more quickly than I might get buy-in on digestion, because they don't understand the correlation yet, because I haven't had enough time with them to teach physiology. So I'm buying myself time, but by getting buy-in on, they understand the relationship between recovery and PRs, all of a sudden they start performing better in the gym. Then the next time I want to add something to their plate, they're like, oh, well, last time coach wanted to add this, or, Sam mentioned we're going to track sleep next, right? Because that plays into recovery or energy. Maybe I take the athlete and he starts with sleep, recovery, and energy. Maybe I take the perimenopausal woman and she starts with digestion, stress, and sleep, or appetite, or something else, right? So I might pick like 1 to 3 things, and the focus is going to be different. But once I build trust, I'm going to layer my next priorities on top of that, and they start to have a little bit more momentum. Typically, they're tracking daily, but submitting and assessing weekly, because I think it can almost be overwhelming to try to have this out of body analytical experience every single day. To some extent, you've just got to live your life, and we're going to improve it as we go. And I think that's what weekly and like monthly touch bases, like, we're going to steer the ship in the right direction. And I'm going to serve as sort of this, sort of these bumpers to keep you moving in the right direction. And I think that's kind of the way that I would approach it, versus throwing like 10 things at a new client at the same time, because they don't understand the relationship or the interconnection between all of those, unless you have someone who's had a coach before, they're super advanced, or they're like really into biohacking. And later in my career, I've had those clients that are super serious. And now I work with a lot of coaches as well. So they understand all this because they've had the education, they've had their certification. They just maybe need help putting it to practice in their own life. So definitely a spectrum. And I'd say it's going to really depend on that person's priorities, because you need to connect with them first in order to kind of stack on top of that.
Okay. So I was just saying how important it is, even though you're building kind of a signature program, we do recommend that, and you have your own terminology, but how important it is to be able to start with where that client is at any one time. And to your point, Sam, not only is it difficult and just sort of counterproductive to unleash too many things to be aware of at any one time, the same thing goes true with just information and education, and overloading that client where their circuits are just going to go off, and kind of one step at a time delivering sort of educational content that's impactful in the moment, relative to where they are in the moment, but also actionable. Right. Something they can do something with moving forward into the next session.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I love the sort of individualized approach or coaching, and like having your own methodology. But I also think in terms of delivery, like even basic like listening exercise, or if you're on the phone with a client or emailing and you explain a topic, or maybe send a voice memo, something as simple as, does this make sense? Or do you understand how this connects? Does this resonate with you? Those 3 questions are super powerful, because then, okay, if they're 100% on the same page, this is super easy for them, they're going a mile a minute, I can ratchet things up a little bit more quickly, versus if they're still struggling, they say, I don't really understand the relationship. Like, why am I tracking this? Or I don't understand what it means. How are cravings different than hunger? And I might have to explain, like, one's a bit more visceral, one's a bit more mental. Here are the differences in what's going on, like hormonally and meal timing and things like that. So I always think asking questions or having the client recap what you've asked of them, in terms of like, okay, so instead of me being the dictator and setting the goal, right, I might teach about, okay, we're going to track sleep, or here's a goal. How, what would work better for you? Do you think it's actually easier to sleep a little bit later in the morning, or would it be easier to go to bed a little bit earlier at night? Or how can you buy back some time in your daily routine? What would make the most sense for you? Or what are some ways that we might be able to improve this? And then, having them kind of come up with their own ideas, I think can be super powerful versus, well, this is the only way to do it, and you need to get 8.5 hours of sleep precisely and wake up at this exact time, and this is what we're going to do. So I definitely think questions are super powerful. Listening exercises, recap, and drilling down on that can be super beneficial. And for the health coaches listening, that's not just during the check-in process, like even on an initial consult or strategy call or sales interaction, like the ability to just have like does that resonate with you? Are you following me there? I think can be overlooked sometimes and really help in terms of knowing when to ratchet up the level of communication in terms of level of expertise or difficulty or how fancy you want to get with things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
One thing that I always kind of gravitate toward when I'm mentoring coaches is this idea that eventually your own program will have, and I'm using the word program just as a catch-all, your own program will have a level of predictability to it. And the people who come and work with you are going to be always, biochemically unique snowflakes, but you can start to predict what questions they're going to ask and what roadblocks people seem to typically come up against. So for example, we were talking about sort of the order in which you release information. And one thing I learned is that before I can teach people, for example, this is just an example, before I can teach anybody how to fast, not that I do a lot of that, but if I were going to, I have to teach them how to break fast. And I didn't do that at first. At first I was like, let's talk about why intermittent fasting is so great or something like this. But then I realized that I was losing them because they would be just doing this thing that I told them to do without understanding how to kind of emerge from it and how to solve for it when the fast needed to end. So over years, I learned the first thing I have to do is teach people how to eat before I can teach them how to restrict eating, in a manner of speaking. But out of the gate, I would have known that. And I think that what's really important for coaches listening is there's going to be a lot of practicing and lots of swings and misses, or a lot of little crumpled up balls of paper at the waste paper basket. And that's 100% part of learning how to really become masterful.
Yeah, I like that. And even, so I actually wrote about this today, is trying things out on yourself before you subject your clients to that, or when you're initially gathering experience. I think it's really important, and trying different things. And, for me, you gave the example of breaking the fast. Like, I know certain foods that will work well for me after maybe I have had, sometimes I will fast when traveling or changing time zones, sometimes periodically at home, or we'll use it as kind of a reset if something's going on, like from a digestive perspective, but not too long. And then obviously we have to explain. Then there's the opposite, which is teaching. Sometimes I feel like with the popularity of intermittent fasting, it's almost harder now to teach people not to fast. I'm like, hey, actually, with your adrenals and your thyroid and the level at which you're under eating, I actually need you to eat, versus like restricting food even more than you're already being restrictive. And I actually want you to kind of keep this stable level of energy throughout the day. So maybe we shouldn't fast. But, I think I'm situationally can kind of be pro everything. It just depends on the client. But I love that you use the example of teaching fasting, or even, understanding the relationship between sleep and how that plays in, and circadian rhythm, and all these different things. And so knowing when to teach something, I think, is cool as far as layering it in, and sometimes revealing that, throughout the process. Like if you were to ask that client, well, do you understand, like, what would you be eating after this, or when would you stop that, or what times of day works with your life? So for example, I've worked with some executives or professional guys who own their own businesses, and they really love like the morning because they're more focused, they have more energy, they can concentrate. So especially folks who are maybe have jobs that require like intensive level of details, maybe think of an attorney or accountant or something like that. And there are other people who really like to kind of do it at night, and that's completely opposite. So teaching and even asking like, hey, when do you think you could fit this into your life? Or based on what you've told me before, Joe, like your schedule is actually kind of crazy during this time. You're saying that that's when you want to put the bulk of your meals during that 8 hours that you're going to be eating. But I'm not sure, how are you envisioning executing on that? And then it gets them to think, oh yeah, I really, when am I actually going to eat? I can't eat during that time. And then they start to rethink the concept of fasting. So I love that you brought that up. I think that was really insightful.
Yeah. Well, actually, I love that you said that the fasting's become such a thing. Like I'll have clients who come to me and right out the gate, they're like, okay, so I'm going to do a 3-day water fast. Okay. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Because they think it's something they have to do. And it is just a really handy example of behavior that clients kind of come to us wanting to experiment with without really understanding why. And I feel like that's my job, is I'm going to teach you a lot about how food works in your body. And then once you understand how food works in your body, we can play with taking it out or stretching our meal intervals, but we don't want to put that cart before that horse.
100%, and I don't know. I mean, Erin and I both work with a lot of women, and I kind of want to dig into this. How do you help a client reverse diet? Because I do get a lot of women who have been under eating and they're like, I'm eating 1,200 calories a day. I can't figure out why I can't lose weight. Like I hear this stuff.
Right.
I would love your sort of thoughts on that and how to kind of unwind and unpack some of this restrictiveness that they're working on and helping people understand conceptually what's going on with their body when they're, CrossFitting 5 days a week and trying to get by on 1,200 calories. And, anyway, this is your thing. So I would love your input on something.
I've had
like that.
so many females in the past, even coaches who are training 14 to 21 times a week doing CrossFit, eating less than 1,500 calories. Mm-hmm. And it comes from the more is better mentality. And I think it's rooted, there's some psychological and emotional roots there beyond what's going on with food. There's a level of control being exerted over the meals themselves and the level of exercise and activity. But my favorite story to tell, and, earlier on when we were asked, or when you asked me about helping new coaches understand this, we use the example of a story. And so I actually have an Instagram caption where I'm like, how can I actually get across the idea of under eating or metabolic compensation in the span of 2,200 characters? And the most powerful sentence I've ever had from a female client is, I have nowhere to go from here, which basically means I've dieted for so long, my calories are so low. If I were to teach them basic like thermodynamics around, well, we have to create a calorie deficit and you need to subtract this amount of food or adjust your portions or whatever, but they've reached a point where it's either no longer sustainable or they're not seeing the results that they once were. And so reframing that as, okay, so how do I create a buffer for you? So next time we want to diet or give your body the ability to recomposition or lose body fat, we have the ability to manipulate your total energy intake. We have to remember, and so with teaching reverse dieting, I always bring it back to kind of energy and stress, because the metabolism perceives energy available, both stored and kind of perceived. So whether that's your level of body fat, and there's a whole bunch that plays into that, whether it's leptin or thyroid hormone, a bunch of different things that play into the diet process. But, we want to look at energy utilization and storage. And we also want to look at stress and perception of stress, which applies to not only our personal life, our work life, relationships. We're looking at lack of food availability or even training to a degree which maybe we're not recovering. So maybe it's more under recovering than overtraining, but we're training intensely and we don't have the bandwidth. So metabolism is kind of like this overall, we need the bandwidth to enter a diet. And so reverse diet is kind of the diet before the diet that punches that proverbial permission slip. Or if you remember when you were a kid, back when we were going to school at school buses, pre-coronavirus, you might need a bus note to go to your friend's house, right? Like you would get that permission slip, or you need a permission slip to go on a field trip, and that would give you the ability to go to the aquarium or go to the museum, or if you wanted to go to your friend's house, you had the little bus note. And so the reverse diet is kind of that note for your body that says, hey, there's energy available here. I'm reducing stress in a number of different forms and fashions. And it's going to allow me to, in a much healthier fashion, go to subtract calories when I need to. And the main thing that's changing there is, rather than having transient metabolic compensation or adaptations that happen on the way down when eliminating calories, when we add calories, we can create the same positive or basically the same compensation or adaptation, but on the way up. So basically teaching clients that, number one, your body's adaptive. So if you eat less food, it will get used to that. There's this whole part of our energy balance equation, thinking about, the calories that we utilize in terms of the digestive process, our non-exercise activity. When you undereat, you're less likely to be walking around and moving and having a good amount of energy. If you guys are tuning into this on, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I'm kind of notorious for using my hands when I talk. And so if I were to diet, maybe my hands would stop moving as much. I stopped flinching. My subconscious utilization of energy would go down. But if I'm well fed, I'm going to have more energy. I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit. Maybe I walk in between phone calls, or I'm walking in between clients. And all of a sudden my non-exercise activity level has gone up exponentially. So we reverse diet for several reasons, but one of the primary reasons is we're addressing metabolic efficiency. And trying to work through that process. Also sort of looking at our fingerprint when it comes to our metabolism, and do we have a history of chronic dieting? What like depths did we go to in terms of, was this like a starvation diet? What macronutrients did we cut out? We also look at the length of the diet and the number of times an individual has dieted. I think the statistic is the average female has dieted 14 times by the time they're between like 40 and 50 or something. Like
Wow.
by the time that they reach kind of midlife, the average female has attempted, and whether they were successful or not, they've dieted at least a dozen times, probably safe to say. And then the dietary rebound statistics are, a significant amount of people when they go on a diet will lose weight. But what's scary is basically all of those people will regain the weight that they initially lost. And so the reverse diet is really the solution there to help bridge that gap between where you want to be and where you are right now. And so we're giving, every time we're going to diet, we're going to give your body that bandwidth to then diet again in the future. It gives you that permission slip, because what happens is a lot of people are successful on the first diet they ever do, or maybe they don't adhere to it and they can't be successful on that first diet, but then they try and try again. And the more times that you try, the more your body adapts as a way to basically protect yourself. So reverse dieting, as far as teaching clients, one thing's important to teach is that adaptive mechanism. Two is using kind of simple stories, analogies, like the nowhere to go from here. Most women can relate to that. It feels like I can't go out with my friends, or I can't eat these foods, or I can't do this because if I do, I'm automatically over my 1,200 calorie allotment, which seems to somehow be the magic number in the health and fitness space in terms of women and eating. And really, when you're CrossFitting and eating 1,200 calories, you're setting yourself up for hypothyroidism and adrenal insufficiency and things like that. So possibly some gut health issues down the road, just from this sheer volume of stress on your body. So for those coaches listening, think of that reverse diet as kind of a permission slip. Gives your body the ability to kind of like get back to a metabolic baseline or status quo of what would be healthier for you, which gives you some wiggle room, gives you some toggles where if in the future you need to subtract calories, you're not pinned into a corner with nowhere to go.
Okay, I want to ask the same question, but from the standpoint of, let's call it maintenance mode, people who are not interested in gaining muscle, losing fat. This is my client. My clients aren't doing that. They're just trying to like understand how food, they're having a better relationship with food, really. And this question actually came up from one of my clients today that I have to get on a Facebook Live and answer in 40 minutes. So if you could answer it for me, that'd be great. Because I understand the concept of metabolic adaptation, and it makes sense in the context of reverse dieting. But that, like, if my clients have just started naturally eating a little bit less because we're addressing hunger and satiety, and they're choosing more satiating foods, so they're just eating a little bit less food and they're experiencing some fat loss that comes along for the ride, is naturally just organically having a lower caloric intake. They're worried, like, I've heard that my metabolism is going to adapt to this, so what am I supposed to do? So my thinking is like caloric undulation. Some days you're going to show up in the world hungrier. Just answer those hungrier days. That's your body kind of just like reset, kind of checks and balances to keep maybe metabolism firing. And I'd love your input on this, because my clients aren't necessarily focused on fat loss. They also don't want their metabolisms to stall out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So stall out, it's kind of relative, right? Because if this is super sustainable and the approach that they're on is something they could maintain for the rest of their life, and they're going to maintain a similar level of activity, I would tune back into that biofeedback that I mentioned, kind of those shreds. So sleep, hunger, recovery, energy, digestion. As long as they have the energy they need to do the activities they love, they're recovering well, they're sleeping well, They are managing their appetite. The foods that they're eating are foods they enjoy. They don't feel deprived. I think you're in a good spot. I think where people end up, they think they're at like calorie maintenance, but there's still room for improvement. Maybe their recovery from exercise is not ideal. Maybe they're not trying to go out and be like a world record holder at something, but they have some hobbies they enjoy, things they like to do. Maybe they want to hike, or they, go to the gym and they want to lift a little bit more or set a PR or something like that. That's where we could play around with maintenance and maybe put in a reverse diet here or there. But I don't think, I actually love the idea of maintenance. It shouldn't be that you're always either dieting or reverse dieting.
Right.
There should be some period in the middle of maintenance, because it teaches you what sustainability looks like, being able to adhere to a set amount of food, and you're establishing that new status quo, which is really hard if you're kind of yo-yoing between really low, really high. So I love reverse dieting. I think you should push to a point at which you do approach kind of your maintenance calories or something that's improving your biofeedback. Really, what would determine whether you need a reverse diet or not is biofeedback. And usually those women who are eating those 1,200 calorie diets that Laura had mentioned earlier, that's really, we need to do it based on the biofeedback, but it also happens that they have a physique goal or a body composition goal that in the future, in order to reach that body composition goal, they need more calories to pull from. If your people are happy with their current body composition, we really have no intention of pulling calories. So that maintenance is fine. I would say the one time you would want to go up before you go back down, or use some, basically increase or kind of fluctuation in those calories, is if you plan to enter a diet phase for a period of time, or if you're kind of repairing after a diet phase. But there's nothing wrong with maintenance. I actually encourage people to seek that out certain times of the year, or depending on what's going on in their life, whether it's social or work, or potentially even a performance related goal, maybe, because you can hit a point in a reverse diet too, or even a calorie surplus for someone trying to build muscle, where they start to get a little lethargic, and the body, the biofeedback of the body will change again. And now all of a sudden, maybe, energy levels are changing, digestion's off because we're pushing a lot of food. And that's where, for an athlete, maybe I add a day where we're intermittent fasting just for a little bit. It's not an everyday thing, but just gives the digestive system a little bit of a break. Or maybe I change some foods around. That's kind of, all of these things are tools. So I'm very pro maintenance. I think your clients could be in a good situation, but I would ask them to tune in to, how are your energy levels? Like, how are you recovering from exercise? What are your future goals? Do you plan to diet at all later this year, or you think you want to kind of stay put? Based on the answer to that question, we'll give you the answer of, we need a reverse diet right now, or we can hold off on doing this for a little while.
Yeah, I think one of the stumbling blocks for some of these women, and it's not a ton of my clients, but I get them because of, the gym business, and there's a fear there. They're legitimately, like, emotionally afraid to add food back in because they're afraid they're going to get fat, or they're going to undo, and I keep trying to tell them, but you're not getting anywhere, right? You're telling me, you're at baseline here and you've got all these problems, and I'm telling you the answer to this is you've got to nourish your body. And you're not doing that, but they're afraid. And I have to literally baby step them. Let's just add 100 more calories of protein, let's say, right? Then let's move to 150 more calories. And we're going to get you to this point where you can really, I guess, appreciate the fact that your body is intelligent and it knows what to do with the nutrients you're giving it if you give it half a chance.
Right. Especially if they intend to still be active, but it's kind of the definition of insanity, right? It's like expecting different results but doing the same thing over and over and over again. So I usually ask, even in an intake process, or kind of an additional, in kind of an additional question when someone comes through during the intake form, is like, what diets have you tried in the past? What's worked for you? What's not working? And usually they'll state that their current calorie amount is not working. And they know, I have nowhere to go from here, as we kind of illustrated before. That's kind of the trademark or hallmark example of a female client who's under eating. And so what I try to teach is, so I use this kind of hamster wheel analogy a lot, but being on a calorie restricted diet and trying to, because we're always taught eat more, exercise less, or exercise more, eat less. The other one would be more hibernation mode if you're like a bear trying to put on some weight. But so in terms of exercise more and eat less, It made sense in my head before it came out onto the podcast. But so with exercising more and eating less, that's sustainable for short periods of time, small bursts, especially if you've already reverse dieted, or you just are a little bit away from a goal, maybe push for a little bit and then back off, push for a little bit, back off. But you can't do that year round. And these women are doing that year round. And so what we have to teach is exercise as a stressor. So I use kind of a drains and charge example because everyone knows, well, I have to charge my iPhone every day if I want to have battery power. So we use kind of that analysis on the exercise front and look at nervous system adaptations. And then in terms of that calorie amount, I'll try to teach them a little bit about the thyroid. So not a ton, but basically, hey, our brain has this communication and, in terms of what's going on with our metabolism, our thyroid health. And when we undereat for a long period of time, we get these transient changes. So your body's actually used to eating less and less food. Now we can sort of train it in the opposite direction by adding very small amounts of food. And we may even play on the fact of like, if they have some past diet education, I'd be like, how many calories do you think you have to eat to gain a pound? And maybe they say, well, I heard that there's 3,500 calories in a pound, right? And it's like, okay, well, not a little bit, right? But we'll start lower than that. And I'll say, so do you think if we added like 50 to 100 calories and just see where your energy's at and see how you're feeling, would you be open to that? And they're like, wow, well, that's like 1/100th of what I need to gain a pound. So that should be totally fine, right? Or 1/10 of what I need. So that should be totally fine. I'm like, okay, let's add 100 calories. And then it happens, starts to do a little bit better. The most stressful diet situation is when you have a bride getting ready for a wedding.
Oh my gosh.
And you know how many women actually need to reverse diet into their wedding, not actually diet. And you'll see, change in 2, 3, 4 dress sizes, reverse dieting. It's crazy.
Wow.
And what's happening is, so I used that hamster wheel analogy and didn't really explain it earlier because I stumbled on my words, but hamster wheel is really like, I'm going to exercise more, I'm going to eat less, but then because I'm exercising so much, but not giving my body adequate nutrition, I won't sleep. I maybe deplete certain neurotransmitters, or I end up with kind of adrenal issues. My circadian rhythm is off, my digestion's off. So then continue this vicious cycle. I'm sleeping less, I'm recovering less. So then in the gym, my performance suffers. I'm not setting any PRs. I feel like crap, so I don't walk around during the day. So my non-exercise activity is down. And when you eat less, you simply have less thermic effective food, which is those calories burned from eating, because I'm eating 1,200 calories. But what if we got off this hamster wheel for a second? Well, if I give you more food and you start to sleep better, guess what? Your workouts are going to be better. Also, sleep alone has been shown to improve insulin sensitivity, tolerance of carbohydrate. This is a good thing. We then improve our production of reproductive hormones, thyroid hormones. We're now going to have a little bit more energy and we can do other things. We're going to actually feel like walking around during the day because we're not so depleted. Our workouts start to go better. We're setting PRs. We're lifting more weights or maybe doing more work in less time. All of that means more calories burned. The walking meant more calories burned. Now I've sent specific signals to my muscle tissue and my muscle's now primed to absorb even more carbohydrate than it was previously. And then I'm feeding it healthy foods. Now I'm potentially building muscle where then I put that muscle into motion and now I'm burning even more calories doing that, just walking and like basic activities. So I try to teach this whole other way to look at things. I was like, well, what if this, what if that? And you keep playing that game and it's like, well, now I'm sleeping better, I'm sleeping better, I'm sleeping better, I'm getting leaner, I'm holding less water because I am sleeping more. And all of a sudden it's like you drop 3 pounds, just most of which was probably water, by the way, and stress and inflammation. But that's a positive sign. So it's like, let's get off the hamster wheel. Let's look at it from a different perspective. And here's kind of our solution to end that chronic dieting. And it is sort of this mental shift that has to take place. And there's an emotional and attachment to that amount of food because they think that their goals lie on the other end of that amount of food, or 1,200 calories, just a little bit longer, and there's so many misconceptions that exist around fat loss. And that's probably one of the primary ones.
Yeah, big time. I just think about all the time I spent dieting, and I'm thankful I don't work in that space because I can't imagine telling a woman to eat 100 more calories a day. It just is completely contrary to what culturally we've been told to do. But great. I mean, just awesome. And I just love that you're such a big fan. Actually, I have a quiz for you, Sam, and hopefully my internet's going to allow me, but can you tell what my necklace is?
Ooh. Well, so it looks like a molecule. It's a little blurry on my end, but it looks kind of like a molecular, molecular structure of some kind. Kind of a root. Basically,
Yep.
it's science on a necklace.
It's melatonin. It's my favorite
Oh,
hormone.
very cool.
Yes.
Yeah, secondary hormone produced by the pineal gland. Melatonin's awesome. So I definitely, so I like that. I like that you have a melatonin necklace. Well, I don't have any cool jewelry like that, but I have an Oura ring, which tracks my sleep, which is obviously very related to melatonin. So we're kind of related on that front. And, use the example, Aaron, of like, well, I don't know that I want to be in the industry and having women add 100 calories. Well, it could be something as small as, hey, can you add a third of a sweet potato to that? Or can you add 10 strawberries? Or can you add, we're going to increase this portion by 2 ounces, little tiny thing. It doesn't have to be calories, right? So I want people to understand that they can take this concept and apply it to whatever resonates most with you. So if you preach a particular eating style, or you have a client that wants to, be vegan or carnivore or whatever approach, I kind of fall in the middle. Like, I think we need certain foods for different reasons. And you could even start with, I've had clients who love vegetables or they love fruit. So I'm like, what's a food that you really enjoy that you is good for you, is healthy, filled with vitamins and minerals, and maybe potentially other micronutrients, and that you're not eating enough of it, and that you like it, and it wouldn't cause you any distress to eat more of it. And they're like, oh, well, I actually really do like blueberry or something like that, right? So we can take a very small portion to add that in first, not even talking about calories, but we're talking nourishment. And so you can use reverse diet in whatever way you want to call it, metabolic reset, or whatever. You can whatever flavor you want to go with, but the concept of how our bodies work will still apply regardless of the dietary approach that you believe in. You can reverse diet and be low FODMAP. It's still, they apply. You can autoimmune paleo. You can go full paleo and reverse diet. You can be in a calorie deficit and do paleo. But I think the problem is people don't understand, well, energy still matters, and you eat a whole jar of almond butter. Like, we're not going to totally defy those laws, but food quality is still very, very important. And I do preach that a lot, but that example of saying, hey, what are some good quality foods that you really love, as we're in this process of maybe adding more energy to your body, kind of helping with that revitalization, what's something you like? And so common answer with people who are restrictive is a lot of those same folks have certain food beliefs of what's good food and bad food. So maybe we start with a category of some food that they believe is good. And so we want the mindset to be aligned with where they're going, because if they don't think it's going to work, they might self-sabotage and it might not work. So I want them to truly believe that's going to work in a food that they think is super healthy and is super great. And so they'll probably pick something they saw in a magazine as a superfood, and we'll go from there.
Acai berry.
Yeah.
So I've got a something I want to throw at you, because I've had a couple of clients ask this of me, and I seem to be getting more and more women closer to my age, older women that are premenopausal or at menopause.
So you're like 27?
Oh yeah, right. I just turned 49, buddy, like a couple weeks ago.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah,
well, I was trying to be nice, but I actually had no
know.
idea that you were 49. So.
Thank you for that.
I've had a lot of females who are right in that age bracket too. So we're probably aligned on that.
And I've had a few of these women ask me, in different words, but pretty much the same question. Like, why is this so hard? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, why is it so hard that I'm micromanaging this? Because a lot of these women are dealing with pre and post-menopausal weight gain. It's all hormonal stuff, but it's not all hormonal stuff. If you're really digging into it, a lot of it's stress, it's lack of sleep. Some of it's caused by hormonal issues. But a lot of it's too just emotional stuff. And with all three of these women, I actually kind of had to talk through this with them from 3 different perspectives, because, my underlying belief was that for all 3 of them, yes, they had this in common, but their environments were different. They had different relationships with food, different types of, their past experience with kind of food and dieting and stuff was different every time. But I'm hearing this kind of question come up from these women. Just, they're frustrated. Like, why is this so hard? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm like, why it's so difficult?
Yeah. Or how to kind of tackle and uncover this thought process and help a client over that hump and help them think through why it's so hard for them in particular.
Yeah. So it can be tough when you have, so female physiology, at least in United States, we're not talking like tribal situations, which I may actually hint on that because it's super interesting. But you're used to normal monthly cycle. It's kind of your normal as you know it, right? And so that begins to change over the lifespan, and it's hard. There's a lot of adjustments that are occurring, and your normal has now changed. So I think one of the reasons when females ask why is it so hard, it's like, well, you've been trained since your teens that this is what happens every month. This is how my body behaves. And let's also take into account many of these women weren't necessarily dieting correctly even during that time period. So now it's even harder because they were still struggling even when things were quote unquote normal. When were they really normal, or did you have adequate progesterone and good levels of thyroid hormone and all these different things? So I think, one thing that's challenging in that particular age group is sleep. Sort of the cascade of lack of sleep can begin to influence willpower. It can influence food decisions. It can influence our resiliency to stress. So I try to approach the recovery angle and stress management angle first, and that can sometimes help with food decisions. But I think some education around how your body is changing is super important. Like, hey, this is what's going on with estrogen, progesterone, or this is what's going on. Your metabolism's not necessarily slowing down, but here's what we need to pay attention to. And a lot of the women that I have had the opportunity to work with are very proactive. They're open to things like maybe hormone replacement or checking these things out. I think if you can get to a place where you're titrating the dosage on that and you have some control over that, by all means, you actually may feel better than you did even prior to some of those hormonal interventions. But I think the biggest needle mover is, as sleep changes, willpower changes, sometimes changes in appetite and things like that. One of the biggest mistakes is like depriving and not having food. And sometimes, I can't eat at night because the fairy comes and it automatically turns to body fat. And actually, eating certain foods in moderate amounts later in the day or having a balanced dinner may actually help you sleep by keeping your blood sugar stable, because if your blood sugar is not stable, what's our body going to do? It may try to pull a little bit from liver glycogen, or eventually gluconeogenesis, cortisol will be released, and we'll actually try to mobilize energy that way. And cortisol is kind of that alertness hormone, fight or flight. Why do you think you can't go back to sleep? It's because hormonally, melatonin and cortisol actually kind of work inversely to each other. So if you're having higher levels of one, that's a problem. Also, when we see changes in estrogen is very closely related to the neurotransmitter serotonin. And so serotonin really helps to drive certain portions of sleep later, especially later in the evening or towards the early morning hours. And so when you have those drops and changes in estrogen and progesterone, that can be especially problematic for those women, because now you're a little bit more anxious, serotonin's down, estrogen, progesterone are changing, maybe a little bit more water retention, different things going on in terms of those receptors that relate to our fluid balance. And that can start to get stressful. And then you feel like you're gaining weight, and then you feel like you're not sleeping, and then you make poor food decisions because you're like, F it. Like, so many of those women, I think, get to a place where they're like, well, this is all out of my control anyway, so I should just eat whatever. And then it only gets worse, because then the sleep quality deteriorates, or hot flashes get worse. So something as simple as regulating temperature in your room, regulating body temperature, potentially doing some contrast hydrotherapy in the evenings, monitoring your blood sugar, keeping your blood sugar stable is so, so important in that age bracket. And so many women just kind of throw their hands up because they're stressed out and they're frustrated about it, and it just makes the issues worse. But if they can start sleeping a little bit better, maybe add some supportive supplements. And then we talked about checking your blood work, obviously certainly important, get some labs done, and then, evaluate, our status when it comes to estrogen and progesterone. And I've seen women, where things improve dramatically, they feel so much better, and then they can go about kind of their daily lives and in their routine, start training again and do things that they enjoy, which, by the way, weight-bearing exercise, super important as, warding off osteoporosis, which women are sort of prone to. We want stable levels of estrogen because it's protective from a cardiovascular perspective. So it's not just hormones, and it's not just about we all want to look and feel good, and obviously have that stabilization there on the hormonal side of things. But these hormones also play a really important role when it comes to longevity. And, when we're looking at things like fracture risk and incidence of heart disease, I think I was reading a study the other day where it's like men are at greater risk all the way up through kind of that perimenopause period. And then all of a sudden women especially when
Yep.
hormones are not properly managed, can actually end up with their cardiovascular risk will increase compared to, you know, what it was previously. So I just try to look at the big picture and start with those things. But a lot of times it starts with sleep, and the blood sugar is not stable. Meal timing is off. And they're depriving themselves, eating less and less and less and less food. I've had, this may have been a couple years ago now at this point, but had women who maybe add 300 or 400 calories in that age bracket, stay around the same weight, without, you know, so they're not putting on body weight, but we're working on improving sleep, improving gut health, adrenal, thyroid, all of that. And then they were working with their physician, their doctor, to sort of work on their HRT protocol. And then once that was finally stabilized, the hot flashes, everything got substantially better. And they had more energy, training, you know, ability to recover and build muscle and do the things that they love. So that's kind of my take on that age group, but it can be a number of different problems. Sometimes it's gut, sometimes it's adrenal, thyroid, but a lot of times it starts with sleep. And something as simple as just, you know, don't think that you can't eat after 5 p.m. or anything silly like that. Like gotta still take care of your body.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I like that answer. Because I think a lot of the perimenopausal women that I'm coaching are still crushing like 4 body pumps and 3 Orange Theories a day too, putting their body under this like crazy amount of like exercise stress and wondering why it's not working anymore. It worked all the time before, and now it's not. So I really like when we put the emphasis on like recovery, sleep, like just taking care of your body as it goes through this change. And some training modalities are incredibly beneficial for women going through that stage of life, like you were saying.
Resistance training.
Yes, huge.
Yeah, it can be super important. Walking, resistance training, combine that, stabilize your blood sugar, get some sleep. You're going to feel 80% better. And then the 20% is optimizing hormones and little details that go into body composition. But the big, you know, that 80% is really, you know, sleep, recovery, weight bearing exercise, walking. Because a lot of times it's like they've changed. Maybe you're moving into retirement. Maybe your lifestyle's changed. Maybe you don't have kids around anymore around the house. Kids go off to college. You're not running the soccer practice anymore. Now you're not walking, like going to the fields, doing whatever you're doing before, picking kids up at school. And now all of a sudden your non-exercise activity went down. Well, okay, you're burning fewer calories, but then you're doing the, you know, maybe the activities that you're changing and doing. I've definitely witnessed the Orange Theory and the Soul Cycle. And well, I need to go to Soul Cycle with Cindy at 7, and then I'm going to go meet my friends for lunch, but I'm just going to only have this salad. And then I'm going to go train, and I do F45 and Orange Theory in the afternoon because Kaylee's teaching and she's just the best. And I just have to do both her classes. And like, that's totally what happens with clients in that bracket. And then all of a sudden they're like, I get home, they maybe have a meal, but it's like, you know, whatever time. And then there's some other things that play into it too that may influence sleep quality, maybe some wine, something like that, and then struggling to sleep, and then body temp issues, and then it sort of repeats itself. So usually I start by addressing that like 2-a-day Soul Cycle Orange Theory action. Nothing against those companies in particular. I think they just weren't designed to be 7 days a week workouts or 14 or stacked with each other. Like those are things that are very similar in terms of the level of intensity and what they're doing. And so when you stack them together, that's triggering your body still to release cortisol and basically behave in a certain way. So definitely not a fan of those 2-a-day intense interval workouts or plyo workouts for women in that bracket who generally do too much formal cardio and not enough low intensity walking and not enough resistance training. So a small amount of resistance training safely, like, you know, start with that, and walking can go a really long way because walking is going to help put us in that parasympathetic state too. And if those women can get outside during the day, get a little bit of natural vitamin D, 2, continue to burn calories while walking, but being in that parasympathetic state, getting outside, our optic nerves also perceive that light, and then going to bed at night becomes a lot easier. A lot of us put all of our stock in our evening routine when it comes to sleep, but really immensely important part of getting sleep is what you do during the day. So that's usually where I start with them, is like walk, you know, focus on your meals, a little bit of training here and there. And I do have some women in that age group that are still crushing the weights, but then they're not like recovering as they should. Give it, you know, I'm like, you're a beast and you're like 50 7 and, you know, you're doing more than some of the guys I know that are my age. And it's like, okay, well, you got to recover and sleep in order to make ends meet there.
Yeah. Amazing. So Sam, I was listening to your podcast on one of my parasympathetic supportive walks this week, and and I just want to ask you about this because there's a little ad in the middle for Metabolism School. Can you talk about Metabolism School, what that is?
Sure. So Metabolism School is just a free week of videos from me educating on these concepts that we talked about. So we talked about energy expenditure and kind of the fat loss fallacy, as I labeled that. We go into how stress influences metabolism, weight loss, and all of those things. By the way, the podcast should have been totally parasympathetic because you might have been like super jazzed about the information that was coming through. You're like, I'm alert. Good. No, I'm glad that it was relaxing and not too stressful. But yeah, Metabolism School is available on sammillerscience.com. The idea with Metabolism School is I feel so constrained by like tweets and Instagram captions sometimes. And so I wanted a free resource that actually taught kind of my philosophies and my approach to these things. I would obviously love if individuals, so for everyone listening, you know, thank you for tuning into podcasts like this and like doing the in-depth route gathering information. But so many people only grab the surface level, quick hitting, instant gratification posts. And so Metabolism School is actually a series of, I think there's about 5 videos in there. And through that, you know, I'm basically teaching a lot of what we talked about today, not necessarily the formalities of reverse dieting, but understanding energy, understanding stress, our hormones, how our hormones play into all of this, how basically we have to take into account both calories and energy and what's going on from an internal or physiological perspective. I teach a little bit about my models, some of the frameworks that we talked about earlier, dimensional metabolism and things like that. So that's Metabolism School. And thank you for listening to the podcast. I appreciate that. Yeah. Which episode did you check out?
Serotonin, because it does relate to my favorite, you know, anything that relates in any way to my favorite hormone I'll listen to.
It does. Serotonin is awesome. We're actually, so on tomorrow, so not tomorrow for you guys listening, but tomorrow for Aaron listening to this, as we're recording live, that's going to be a little bit more on, I was trying to do like 9 minutes on neurotransmitters and make it like a catchy title. Mm-hmm. And it turns out you can't actually talk about neurotransmitters in 9 minutes. You run out of time. So it ended up being like, I'm going to need to do this more in the future. But Friday episodes I try to keep those kind of like fast, where if you're in between things or you just want to learn something and feel accomplished, we've gotten some good feedback on those because it can be difficult sometimes to try to absorb everything from a longer podcast. I love them personally, but sometimes I feel like I have to pause, come back, or in the middle of your workday, it's tough because maybe something you can listen to a podcast and some you can't. So I try to mix in some shorter episodes over there just so you can pick it up, you can feel accomplished, like you learned something new, and then go about your day. And then if you want a longer episode, we do those, you know, once a week as well. So that's kind of the philosophy behind that.
That's great.
Love it. So people should go to sammillerscience.com and that's where they sign up for it.
Add my name. So my name and then science. So sammillerscience.com. I'm Sam Miller Science on Instagram, Sam Miller Science on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I always want to say iTunes, but it's not, like podcasts aren't on iTunes anymore. So I would say iTunes and Spotify. I'm like, nope, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But yep, pretty much Sam Miller Science across the board. If you see a tweet about coronavirus and Doritos, know you heard it here first with the ladies on the Health Coach podcast.
So just a little side note. So my son got me into Twitter recently. Okay. And I kind of think I need to get off it. It's nasty. Like,
yes, Twitter's aggressive. I've had people retweet that and bash that. Even Instagram can be aggressive. I had to turn off my comment. First of all, I was like draining my phone battery. I've never had anything go viral before. I don't know how people do it because you get so many notifications that your phone is like freaking out, number one. So two, like a lot of times I just have notifications off, but I was trying to like interact and engage because I could tell it had some traction, and also was trying to positively represent myself and teach a little bit. It's like so many notifications, and I look at my phone, I'm like, geez, it's killing my battery. Like it was like, I got to plug this thing in. But yeah, it got to a point after, so it ended up over 5,000 likes, but the comments, I had to turn off the comment. It got to a point where people would come in and chime in with more aggressive opinions than my own opinion. And then someone would argue with that opinion. And then someone else would I'm like, guys, come on. Like, first of all, you can go argue with each other somewhere else. This has nothing to do with my post. And then a lot of people don't read the caption. And so they're picking at that. And then of course, some people reposted it or took it out of context. And then a month later, of course, the situation is totally different. But yeah, it's crazy. Twitter, aggressive, Laura, and then also even Instagram. So I find it's like, it's difficult to educate sometimes as people are popping in, and then it's like, they'll pick on someone else's comment. It's like, I didn't invite, like, but I want my stuff to be public, but it's like, I didn't invite you to necessarily come over here. Usually those people that are trolling, they just don't have much better to do. There's not a lot of positive things going on in their life. So try to give them a little bit of a pass. I don't know what happened. Maybe they had a bad day.
Right.
Maybe someone took their lunch money. We don't know.
Jeez, I know, but dang, like some of the snarky, it's like, I feel like because it's limited, people like throw these bombs and run, just try to be and out snark each other. I'm kind of like,
it is snarky, but also, what is it, 140 characters? So it's like
that.
You've almost got to like trigger in order to get attention. And that we actually, so this was really good. We chatted about this before, and I don't want to take up too much more time, but basically how oftentimes in these arguments, and we were talking about insulin before we hopped on the show, and people arguing like, well, this matters for weight loss, this doesn't matter for weight loss. And part of it, like if you're a coach listening to this, understand that that's not always good coaching. Sometimes that's marketing to get attention on your platform. So always look for kind of the deeper message, the caption that's going on there, things behind what that person's actually saying. But usually what's happening is someone tried an approach, it worked for them, they're trying to gain traction in their marketing, and polarity is one of the ways to do that. So I just want to touch that up, put a nice little bow on Aaron. So Aaron was actually I can't take credit for it. Aaron was actually the one who mentioned that earlier, but I feel like we forgot. And so I don't think things up.
It's true.
We were talking, but I mean, I posted a tweet. I don't tweet very much, but I posted a tweet and then shared it to Instagram similarly when the coronavirus started, and it did not go over well. My tweet was something to the effect of, the time to boost your immunity is before.
Yeah.
Because I was getting annoyed by all of these people saying, now's the time to boost your immunity, join my health coaching program, join my online virtual fitness class. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of like, it's a little bit too late.
You had a few
for that
decades, maybe.
And I lost hundreds of followers.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. I don't have a big following on Twitter. I just screenshot them and then I would put them on Instagram, but I've switched that up a little bit. But I'm sorry you got, they weren't super receptive to your message. I mean, the truth is that most of us have had a few decades to get our immune system moving in the right direction before the situation. So it's difficult, but sometimes people just don't want to hear the other side of things.
I don't want to hear it. You're exactly right. All right. Well, thank you. I, as always, learned a lot again. So thank you for gifting us with your presence for a second time. This is awesome. And I am going to encourage everybody, including myself, to go in there and check out Metabolism School.
Definitely.
Really, really cool.
Yeah, check it out and let me know what you think, guys. There's plenty of other free resources too. So there's other guides and things on the website, but that one, depending on when this episode goes live, it's kind of near the top. So you should have an easy time finding it. My goal is just, people create a lot of confusion around metabolism, and the truth is it doesn't need to be that way. So Laura, I appreciate the support, and Aaron, thank you guys for having me on again. It's always fun to chat with you ladies.
Love it. We love what you're doing. Keep doing it.
This podcast was brought to you by Primal Health Coach Institute. To learn more about how to become a successful health coach, get in touch with us by visiting primalhealthcoach.com/call. Or if you're already a successful health coach, practitioner, influencer, or thought leader with a thriving business and an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us at hello@primalhealthcoach.com and let us know why we need to interview you for Health Coach Radio. Thanks for listening.